Illinois keeps the hat in Champaign for a second year in a row, and they end the season 8-4, despite all the turbulence of last week and everything that was 2025. They at least end the season on a high note. But welcome back to the Illini Audible Podcast. My name is Saeed Bravo. Thank you so much to you guys for tuning into this episode of the pod. I really, really appreciate it as always. And today we're back talking about this Illinois football program, reacting to what we witnessed last night against Northwestern. That Snow Globe Bowl is what I'll call it because the elements were certainly a factor inside of this game, certainly the first half, and you saw the circumstances that was, and for a second you maybe worried about whether or not this game would be played. I know that a lot of things in the region changed in terms of like high school football and all that stuff, but this game remained. And you watched everything as it unfolded. Was there in person, covered the game, and just reacting to this game and what it was by itself, you feel good about how Illinois ended the season despite all the elements and despite the turbulence that was not only the season in its totality, but just what this game had in store. Uh, and we'll get into a lot of that, but Illinois wins a game that in the past you would have said this is gonna be a tough one. And listen, coming into this game, you thought, well, this is a Northwestern team that's on the upswing. This could turn out to be a thing where this Northwestern team could surprise a couple people. Yeah, I know you played Champaign, but there was a lot of things inside of this game leading up to this game that you thought, well, Northwestern could easily win this game, and Illinois can end the season 7-5, and it just be a total dud end of the season. But instead, you do have this saving grace that you do win the hat for a second year in a row. You keep it in Champaign, the rivalry game, in-state rivalry game between Northwestern and Illinois. When in the past, you saw Northwestern totally dominate Illinois for what was years after years, but instead now you do have that switch of momentum. I think they've won 4 out of the last 5 uh, games against Northwestern, and that is a sign of progress. That is a sign of satisfaction from where this program was. But obviously, so much more to unpack in terms of what was this game, and not only that, but the expectations going forward and how this kind of 8-4 end to the season propels this team into 2025, or excuse me, 2026 and beyond, because there's still, despite the turbulence, and I keep using that word because it was a rough ride that was 2025 after all the preseason expectations, how high some national pundits were on Illinois, how people viewed this Illinois program on the upswing after last season's major breakout season of winning 10 games for the first time in a really long time. You had this season kind of go sideways. And if you really pick apart the losses inside of this season, you feel discouraged about where this team is headed. But this team did win 8 games. And yes, while historical context is important and how much progress this football program has made, there's still so much more left to be desired when it comes to the future of this program. You hope that this season can continue to be a part of that uphill climb that Illinois hopes to make, especially with all the resources that are being infused into this particular program. Now, listen, progress is never linear, and Illinois has certainly had their rough rides in the road along the way, and we'll dive into that big picture much more later. But for now, we need to kind of dive into what was this game against Northwestern. Obviously, I mentioned the idea that this team had lost so many games before against Northwestern, but now today, last night, they win a game in the middle of all the elements and what it was. You saw the snow, you saw the blizzard, and I will be honest, the transmission did not do justice to what the elements actually were. That weather, that not only was it just a cold, the wind and the snow piling up was no joke. It was slick. You got to the point where we were heading down to the field, and Memorial Stadium was really slick. You really had to be careful. You can just imagine the amount of grip that you needed to have on the field if you were really, especially in that first half, if you were really planning to get to the quarterback. And I'll get into that in a little bit because the defense is the story of the day for Illinois. But you saw how this team responded, and you feel good about what they did inside of what was this little mini game. And to start the season, to start this game, I thought coming into this game and just given all the elements and given what it was, that you wouldn't really learn much about either of these teams because I mean the elements were just so crazy, so rare to have a snow game like this. I think it's the first time in Geese Memorial Stadium's 101-year history that snow storm makes the elements that bad. And you certainly saw it visually. It felt like when the defensive lines were getting off to the snap, it was going to be hard for them to stay upright and to get maybe to get the timing right, simply because you never know when you could slip, and that would ruin your rep. And that was one of the things that went through my mind, but also the idea that you couldn't really learn much because of the elements. Now, the second half, I think, told the story much better. I think the the elements were definitely less of a factor there. The snow kind of dipped into it kind of slowed down, and the wind was, I think, pretty much the same. But for the most part, this game was played. I thought the first quarter, certainly, you what was there much to learn, because Illinois went on fourth down on Northwestern 17. And if it wasn't for the 30 plus mile per hour wind, it would have been likely that David Olano would have come out and kicked that field goal. But that was certainly a factor. But I was pleasantly surprised that in the second half, the field was much clearer, and it was a game where you could come away learning at least something from a half, from three quarters, from both of these programs. And for Illinois, the defense was that story. It was the silver lining after how many times this defense has taken bullets, and rightfully so, has taken the bullets for how bad it's largely been, how bad the results have been. I mean, I said it last podcast, and then I wrote it all over. 35.6 points on the road in 2025, and they allowed 30 plus points 4 different times. It was among the worst defenses in the Big Ten, and you felt to a certain extent that what was this? It was the personnel, it was the coaching, it was a mix of all that. But you felt like listen, for example, Miles Scott, this is a broader conversation, but Xavier Scott getting injured and having to be replaced by Tanner Heckel, a Tanner Heckel who played significant snaps and was probably not set up to succeed because of that. It was pretty early for him to get that many snaps in 2025, and for him to struggle significantly throughout the season was something that you would have not wanted to happen. But the bottom line is that this coaching staff has to have a plan in place for injury like that. And it felt like, for the most part this year, it was rough. It was very turbulent, but at least here tonight, last night against Northwestern, you saw this defense respond, end the season in the best way that they could, especially in that second half, because in the first half, it felt like you saw a little bit of the same. Yes, you saw a lot a lot of drives from Northwestern go the distance. The difference was the fourth down stops, but you felt like this defense was going to be a lot of the same. You still, though, you saw Matt Bailey, a guy like Matt Bailey, just flying everywhere on the field. Dylan Rosiak was also a guy who made his appearance obvious on that night. Torrey Cox was a guy. I mean, and I will dive a little bit more into the individuals that made this defense, that made this 2025 team, because it's important to know. But overall, the defense, I thought, played really well. And obviously, the elements are a part of it. But you saw how this defense responded. And to win that turnover margin was huge. You won it, what, 4-2. And that part of things so much so much tells so much of the story, and you felt really good about how this defense was able to end their season as a collective, while the offense was stalling. I mean, you look at this, you look at the statistics, and Luke Altmaier did not have his best day. 10 for 15 passing, 136 yards, 67 completion percentage. Listen, I will say, I mean, like I said, for the defense, the elements played a part. There's no question. I was dumbfounded a couple of times as to why they would pass the ball in certain situations when it felt like the running game was going to be the obvious go-to in this particular game. With that being said, Khalil Valentine, I thought, played an excellent game. You saw him explode for a couple big runs, especially that 20, the long of 20 that he had. I think that was in the third quarter, but you felt like if you just matriculated the ball, you kept abiding by that philosophy, that you would likely reap those benefits. But Barry Lunny reaped in, or peppered in, a couple passes as well. And credit to him, there were significant amount of plays where you saw the explosives up. There was one to Colin Dixon on the first drive of the day that went 35 yards, or excuse me, 26, no, 35 yards. And that was big. No idea how he got open, but he just did. And Luke Altmaier found him. Um, and so you felt good about the distribution of the offense. The thing is that it was hard to finish, and they got stuffed in the red zone. And then it was, are you going to kick into the wind, or how are you going to navigate this situation? And simply, this offense did struggle inside of this game. Hank Beatty, 3 catches, 21 yards, a long of 9. Colin Dixon, 2 catches, 53. Obviously, that 35, big one, 2 catch. Tanner Arkin with the 2 catches and 33 yards. He had that one key play that put them in business after a turnover. So that was good to see. You saw a lot of Aiden Lawfrey, a lot more of Aiden Lawfrey inside of this game, which I was surprised to see, because he has not been a big part of this program over the last several weeks. I think he did play a couple of snaps last week at Wisconsin and whatever the showing that was. But overall, I mean, the offense generally struggled, when throughout the entire season they carried most of the load, especially in a game like against USC, in a game against Purdue. Those were the showings where this Illinois offense was playing really well, and that simply wasn't the case here against Northwestern. The positive was that the defense showed up. There were so many times where, even when they weren't going, there was one drive that I do want to highlight. Northwestern went, I believe it was after an Illinois turnover, and there was an ensuing drive where you felt like Northwestern was going to drive down the field and score a touchdown. There were 3 separate times where you thought, oh, there's going to be interception, there's going to be a fumble here, because the Northwestern offense looked shaky. 3 potential turnovers inside of this drive. And one was there was a huge DPI on Torrey Cox that led to that drive. You had it just looked like Northwestern was going to be poised. what happened next? There was a turnover on Northwestern. And that's the kind of thing that you needed from this Illinois defense. And they credit to them. They were certainly up to the task on this particular night. There were certainly a lot of things inside of this game that gave you optimism about this defense. The thing about it is that this season, you felt like these were going to be players that you would rely on. There were star players: Dylan Rosiak, Matthew Bailey, Miles Scott, Gabe Akis, that were the core of what this team really was. And in the season's totality, the defense underperformed, but at least it was refreshing to see this second half showing for this Illinois defense and the way they went about it. Torrey Cox getting an interception. That was in the first half, but Torrey Cox getting an interception. The amalgamation of what he was for this Illinois program throughout the past 2 seasons is a guy who is undersized. It's really an underdog story that I really enjoy talking about, because this is a guy who's really, really undersized. And guy is practically 5'6", but listed at 5'9", and he's always been doubted. I mean, I had a conversation with him during the week a couple weeks ago that he was undersized and that he'd always have these doubts. They'd always have this doubts, and it was hard for him to go through that. But to look at him as a guy that became a staple inside of this program is certainly a credit to him, but also a credit to the defensive staff for having faith in this guy and him being able to make those kinds of plays. And you saw that interception that he was able to get against Northwestern. Obviously, Miles Scott, as a guy that really, really, I thought struggled throughout a majority of the season, especially without his compadre Xavier Scott. And the 2 interceptions, man, one of them, he came out like a bullet. And that's the kind of thing where you turn your head and you you feel satisfied with what these guys did inside of this game. You lament the fact that this defense underperformed throughout a majority of this season, but at least they gave you this on their senior night. And it was nice to see that. And that leads me to another point. The senior class, that was guys like Luke Altmaier, guys like Hank Beatty, guys like Dylan Rosiak, Torrey Cox, Matthew Bailey, Malachi Hood, Miles Scott, Gabe Akis, uh, Josh Kreutz. So many of those guys that have been a core of this program. What they will be remembered for inside of Champaign is for uplifting this program for as a collective and being a part of a phase, and I would call it a transition phase for this Illinois program, from going from a middling team years ago to now being year in and year out middle of the pack Big Ten team that will threaten. That you are like, if you are another team in the Big Ten, be careful with this Illinois team. They could beat you. Now, when we talk about the true contenders in the Big Ten, that might be a different story, at least right now. But they can beat Northwestern. They can beat a Purdue. They can beat Nebraska. They can beat certainly a team like USC when they come here. They come to the Midwest. A team like probably UCLA. They can beat a Penn State team right now. They can beat several teams in the Big Ten. Now, when you go through that upper echelon, things get murky. But they can be a top team where it's like they can be at the same level as Iowa. They're at the same level as USC. And that puts them in a good position just generally in 2025 and beyond. And so to me, that's what a lot of these guys will be remembered. And I wish I had time to talk about all of these guys. Obviously, touched on Torrey Cox and what he's been for this program. And I talked to I mean, Matthew Bailey is a guy who is I really have an appreciation for him because feels like he pops up on the field all the time. Like this guy finds a way to get to the ball, and Gabe Ackus is a guy who, last night, two sacks in critical moments. One of those could have been an interception that he probably laments actually sacking the guy because he brought him down by contact. But two tackles for loss, four tackles, a guy that clinched 10 plus sacks uh, and leads the Big Ten in sacks in 2025. This is a guy that you will remember if you're an Illinois fan. You guys will remember him for a long time, and it's unfortunate the way that this season unfolded for the defense because you felt like this is one of those guys that could draft stock could be totally heightened, and instead it's probably around the same if not lower simply because of statistics. But the fact of the matter is this guy is a total beast, and there's an appreciation for what he is as a threat inside of the trenches. Miles Scott is a guy who's always been that leader, and for him to have that game like that and the way that it unfolded is a positive for him. And I was disappointed by just the kind of his season in its totality, but to have this is really, really, really good. Uh, I had a conversation with Dylan Rosiak after I asked him a question about the expectations. I also asked Josh Cruz. Didn't get a chance to ask anyone else, but I asked them to. And Bielema talked about the idea of Bielema and Kreutz. That is, Kreutz cited Bielema, and the question was, what do you make of the expectations that were and how this season unfolded for you guys? Groot said, cited Bielema and said, "Well, this was a year of response," and you to that you do give credit to the defense after every and most and the offense as well because it felt like for a large part probably minus this game, and you do factor in the elements into it all. After every loss, this team bounced back, and you saw that every single week. Now it wasn't good to see them lose the games that they did in that fashion, but you felt really good about the way that this team was able to respond, and they did so after every loss. Wisconsin, they came in and won this game. Indiana, they came in and won against USC. Washington, they won against, was that Purdue? Or I have to look at the schedule because it escapes me right now. But the point remains the same, that this team did respond. It came in different ways. It was mostly the offense, but you saw that tonight, last night. Northwestern won. Illinois beat Northwestern, and you felt good about how they did it, and especially given the elements, it was really awesome to see this particular iteration of this 2025 team. It is defined as the team of response, and it's unfortunate that they didn't get any further in what it is they were trying to accomplish. Dylan Rosiak, what he said was, yeah, obviously we had big expectations, and we're disappointed in the way that things went, but also talked about the response and how it is to navigate a season like this. And everybody inside that building understands that the level of disappointment that was, and whether or not those expectations were fair or not, it doesn't matter because right now Illinois will only look towards the future, is what Bielema says, and he was really hyping up. Bielema was hyping up the fact that he's really excited about the 2026 class. He's a bunch of guys who could potentially be first year starters, which is something that is pretty unprecedented for this Illinois football team, this Illinois football program. You hope that's true. You hope that it unfolds in the way that he talks about it unfolding. You're not sure. You just don't know, but you hope that things go the way that it goes. But for right now, you're going to go to to another bowl game, which is great. 3 bowl games in the span of 4 years, I believe. And you have to hope there's going to be so much change just because of how many seniors were inside of this class. The potential of changes on the defensive staff because of the reality of the results. The potential of changes on the offensive staff because of the potential of a coach, of a coordinator taking a different job, which is a reality inside of this business. Your quarterback potentially going to the NFL and using his final year of eligibility at Illinois. Your wide receiver room. You don't know the transfer portal and who will choose to leave and who will choose to remain. Things are going to be very, very different in 2026. You hope that Bielema can navigate it well. He inspires a lot of confidence for it, but it's going to be interesting to follow the subsequent offseason this year because of the amount of changes that, one, will need to be made, two, are part of the cycle of the circle of life in college football, and three, just by happenstance, just by the nature of the beast. And you wonder how it will all be navigated. One thing is for certain, though, Bielema has the resources. I mean, you saw the huge donation that Geese made, and while the idea is to use a lot of that money for the facility for Geese Memorial Stadium to renovate all that stuff, whatever, there's no doubt in my mind that it's used for football. Part of that is going to be to get athletes here for facilities to incentivize potential recruits to come to Champaign. And so, with that being said, there's so many things that are going to change about this team. It's going to be very interesting to follow. For now, you looked at what bowl game they're going to play, and it looks like, based on the way that Altmaier and Gabak has answered their questions about whether or not they will play in the subsequent bowl game, the vibe is definitely that they won't. I mean, that's just kind of the vibe that you get. They're not going to say it publicly right now, but it's just the vibe that you get. And that's kind of what it is. But 8-4, man. You're If you're a longtime Illinois fan, you're satisfied with what it is that this season was. But if you really look at the losses and how colossal this was, there's no question to me that this season was incredibly turbulent. At face value, you think, hey, another season, you maybe you underperformed. You lost 2 games that a lot of people thought you shouldn't have lost. You didn't know that Indiana was going to be what they were going to be. That Ohio State game was always going to be tough. Going to Washington is always tough. But, man, losing at Wisconsin is something that Illinois will have to work on avoiding consistently in the future. Yes, trap games are a thing, but the best teams do not fall victim to trap games. It's okay to lose to Indiana. Maybe not in the fashion that you did, but people thought, hey, you could win or lose that game. It's a coin flip. It was more than a coin flip, but things went the way that they went. 8-4. At face value, you feel good. I think if you really look at the season that it was, you stay afloat. You stay in the uphill climb that is college football into the status that you want to get if you're Illinois, especially with the resources that you now do have. You feel like 2024 put you really high. You came down to earth a little, but you're still a program that can consistently compete in the Big Ten. And I mean, you put down a lot of really good a couple really decent teams in the Big Ten, but it's going to be time to take the next step. I mean, the Maryland game, Rutgers game, those are 2 East Coast teams that came to your building. You were able to take care of business, but I mean, the East Coast, and USC came to your building, played at 11 a.m. They're a West Coast team, and you played them really close. It came down to a field goal. Well, that is a good win. You you flip that around. If you go to USC, I'm not sure you win that game. Washington, you saw what happened there. I think if they come here, you probably can be much better, but you're never sure. And I was dumbfounded by how bad this Illinois team played on the road, including Purdue, a team that they did end up beating, but defense struggled again. I think there's a lot of things inside of this season where you look at, and yes, it is great to win the games that you did win. There's still so much more progress that can be made for this Illinois football program. But the great part about it is that this Illinois football program will continue to have the resources to build on those promises. We'll see if that continues to be the case. I do think that if you're Illinois in 2026, if you're on the outside looking in like we are, you do believe that this team will have a lot of questions, especially at the quarterback position, especially if the coaching staff shakes up like I would expect it to, but you still have faith. I think the biggest thing is that you have faith in Bielema to continue to right the ship, to continue to put in seasons where you feel satisfied if you're an Illinois fan. But like the class of 2026 did, you hope that this team, or 2025, excuse me, you hope that this team can continue to push the envelope, and you hope that the players, and this is going to be key, the players that you recruit, that you retain, not just transfers, materialize into what you hope they become. Khalil Valentine's a good example of having an up and down season that early on in the season had really good results, and then over the course of a lot of the season kind of struggled. But he's a guy who you shaped into what he could become. Hank Beatty is a guy who totally exploded this season. A guy who you had inside of your program for a long time, Matthew Bailey, Dylan Rosiak. So many of those things that you will need to keep an eye on. There's a lot of players to keep an eye on as well in on this roster that, if they stay, are going to be a key piece of those teams in that this program in 2026 and beyond. But for now, not to get too ahead of ourselves, still an 8-4 team. Probably going to have a bowl game in Nashville. We'll see what they end up doing, and that announcement will come in the ensuing week. But it, you can't feel like you can't put your head down for an 8-4 team. It's still it's still, while it comes down, the expectations were much higher. You still feel like an 8-4 team won't, it won't kill you. And that's the part where you feel positive about it. 7-5 would have been pretty catastrophic ending to the season, but at least you have this. We'll see where this continues to go, because I'm curious to see how this next couple months go for this program, the influx of talent that they will have, and what it will look like. But for now, appreciate you for tuning into this episode of the pod. Subscribe, rate, review if you so please. This is not the end. We will continue to talk about Illinois football in 2025 and beyond. Illinois basketball is in the midst of a interesting season so far, and we will soon after talk about this Illinois basketball program, dive into a little bit of that as well, and what the thoughts are on that. But subscribe, rate, review if you so please. Peace.